Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for giving up your evening to come and see this evening. We're going to have a chat about the new inspection framework. We're here for about half an hour or so, and if all goes to plan, there should be time for a few questions at the end as well. Dave, can you see my screen okay?
I can see it perfectly, Rob. Yeah.
Lovely. Let's make a start then. So this is for schools who are members of associations, be that HMC, IAPS, Girls' School, and so on. If you're an Ofsted school, this doesn't apply to you, in which case you can go and have your evening meal right now. But so we're just looking at independent schools who are members of associations. If you're wondering why they're asking me to talk about it tonight, I am Robert Lilley, as Dave said, a former head, a consultant with a company called RCL Education, and I do work as a reporting inspector with ISI when commissioned to do so. So that's the basis on which I'm talking to you tonight. To make it clear, these are all personal views you're going to hear tonight. There's some facts, but there's a lot of opinion. Where it's opinion, it's mine. I'm not an ISI employee, so disclaimer there. There's a new framework about to be launched, and many of you will have had the letter to say it's actually going to be launched on Monday. Why? So many people are asking. The old framework actually didn't not work. Why did it need fixing? Well, ISI tell us that there have been some significant changes since 2016 when the previous framework was put into place across education and indeed across wider aspects of society. In 2016, for example, we hadn't heard much about keeping children safe. We hadn't heard of RSE at all. We didn't know what SVSH was. We didn't know about Everyone's Invited. Digital learning was very much in its infancy. So there have been some quantum leaps in the way we do things, and the new framework is being designed to capture some of those changes. I think in essence, the last bullet point is the one that matters. The key thread about all this is we are being encouraged to actively promote the well-being of pupils. Actively promote the well-being, and you'll hear that theme come up several times as we go forward. At this stage, until Monday, there are some things we still don't know. There are plenty of things that we do know, though, and I'll take you through those as best I can. So what will remain the same? Well, you're going to get a report at the end of an inspection, and that's going to tell the outside world how well you meet the independent school standards and the other regulatory requirements. And I'll say this several times as well, the regulations are not changing. If you were compliant in a recent inspection and you do things the same way, subject to things changing in the new version of keeping children safe and so on, but if you do things the same way you did and you were meeting the regulations before, you are very, very likely to be meeting those compliance side of regulations again. So that's the starter. The inspection system will try to capture what's particular about your school. There is a slight danger with a system, with any framework, that reports can become a little formulaic. And one of the things we try and do as RIs is tailor that so that you recognize your own school and your parents recognize their school and your children recognize their school in those reports. And that will continue to be the case also as we go forward. You're going to get 2 inspections over the next 6 years. You can assume, all things being equal, as long as DFE don't call something forward or you don't apply for a material change. But in routine terms, you're going to be looking at once every 3 years or thereabouts. The proposals then. We're moving from 2 different types of inspection that we've had this time, which was the compliance side. So you may well have had an RCI, a regulatory compliance, 6 years ago, and then perhaps an EQI with a light touch focus compliance as part of that. Different styles of inspection. It's going to be one style of inspection every time they come. So you know what to expect. It's going to be the same formula each time. One of the things that ISI are looking to push, thinking of pupil wellbeing, is inspecting through a pupil lens. What's it like to be a pupil in this school is the question we've been told we've got to find out about. What that looks like exactly, we're not sure yet. That's hopefully something that will come clearer on Monday, but that's a question you need to bear in your mind as well. And the other big change is the introduction of a new role called Associate Inspector. And I'll come back to that a little bit more later on. So a lot's the same. There are some differences, and I'll come on to those shortly. As I said, the regulations are basically the same, but are simply repackaged, and the success will be reported on those in new sections. In the purple box there, you can see Regulation 34, Part 1, Part C, in the current framework. This is a leadership and management regulation, which is there, and you are being judged on this right now. On your last inspection, you were judged on this. And there is already there that notion that you must actively promote the well-being of pupils. You can see that there are 5 bullet points under there which define well-being, and fundamentally the new inspection framework is going to take those 5 bullet points and use those as the pillars for the new framework. So it's nothing new, we've already been inspected on it, but it's going to be packaged up rather differently. If you want to see what the framework looks like in its draft form at the moment, that's the proposals, not the final documentation. That's on the ISI website at that link there. You can copy that down, or you can just visit the website. It's very clear to see. So let's have a look at some of the guiding principles before we get to the nitty-gritty of what's being proposed by ISI. There's a notion of manageability. There's been a huge burden of paperwork. This framework actually reduced it significantly from the one before that, but there is a huge burden on schools to get paperwork ready, and also on inspectors to read it all. And sometimes that's tough. To give you an example, I had a school a couple of weeks ago where when I went on the ISI portal, which is a good place to put all your documentation if you haven't already done so, there were 77 different pieces of paper. It took me over 2 weeks to read through them and balance my family life and so on and so forth as well. And I didn't feel I couldn't, otherwise I wouldn't know the school well enough. So the school had gone to a lot of trouble to put that up there. I had to then respond by reading that. Thankfully, I had some time. I have been on inspections where there's nothing on the portal, and I get 77 documents or thereabouts on the Monday night, or while I'm traveling on the train, and that's absolutely impossible. I can't, as an RI, do your school justice if you're throwing that much stuff at me at late notice. So we need to think carefully what actually needs to be on the portal. And I think guidance will come on Monday. It's going to be significantly slimmed down from where it is now. Your key policies, your safeguarding, health and safety, your first aid, bullying, complaints, RSE, they need to be on your website, so I can get those from there anyway. So if you put one copy on there, you don't then need to repeat the whole thing on the portal. So that's half a dozen less documents that we have to read, and we both have to manage. So think carefully what needs to be on there to sell your school to its best without overburdening yourselves and overburdening the inspectors. And I think more guidance will come on that on Monday. Another one to think about is the role of the CEF. A lot of you produce CEFs that are nearly 100 pages long in some cases. Why? The CEF is not an inspection requirement. ISI produce a CEF because the boxes on it match the boxes on the inspection framework. That's meant to be helpful, not a burden. A lot of the CEFs that I read, frankly, don't tell me very much at all. They simply tell me that the pupils are ever so nice and the teachers work ever so hard. It doesn't mean anything anyway. So why are you going to so much trouble to fill it in? Some schools have got really punchy, hard-hitting, effective CEFs, which are designed to be what a CEF is, a management tool to help you as a leadership team reflect on where you've been and where you're going next. And for me as an RI to share some of that gives me a really good bit of context about your school. Don't fill it in for the sake of it. There is no requirement to fill it in. And if you are going to fill it in, because it helps you make sure it's punchy and effective and answers the questions. The other thing is some RIs have apparently been stressing schools with some of their requests whilst on site. For example, I've heard stories of colleagues who maybe didn't like reading something digitally, so have asked the school to photocopy a load of stuff. We've been told that's not going to be allowed anymore going forward. So the RI should be much clearer about how to use what you give them. And when we all talk together, we think we can make the whole thing much more manageable on both parties. Collaboration is another theme that is coming out in the new inspection framework. The whole notion, which has been there before, that inspection should be with a school rather than to it or at it, or in some cases against it. So there'll be lots more talking with your RI going forward in the new framework. Those of you who have been inspected recently, you probably find that the RI will speak to you each morning, each evening, and often in between as well. That's going to be really encouraged in the new framework. Regular dialogue seems to be the way forward, so that if we're making decisions on RIs, you understand why they're being made, and you've heard some of the conversation surrounding it, rather than just being presented with feedback at the end. A couple of things that have been used in the pilots to help with this sort of dialogue are, for example, learning walks with leaders. So an inspector might follow one of your senior leaders round just for maybe 1 or 2 lessons, getting a flavour of the what life looks like, what that classroom climate might be. And again, that allows me to say to you as a leader, here's what I think I've seen. And you can say, yes, that's either fits, or actually we were a bit unlucky there, let's try a different classroom instead. Another one that's been trialled is book scrutinies, but rather than just having book scrutinies in the inspector base for us to look at, is either bringing a head of department to explain the books so we get better context, or in some cases, maybe asking the children to come and explain their work, rather than just us just looking blind at those books, which again will help a great deal for us to understand. We're very conscious, though, about manageability in small schools. Having your heads of departments and your senior leaders do all those things in a 1,500 person high school is very different if you're in a sort of 45 pupil prep school where the head does everything and can't spare the time to come and do this, or you don't have heads of department. So it's very much a negotiation. There's no hard and fast rules as yet. Typicality is another wonderful word that's come out as a theme. Let me try and explain it like this. One of my early inspections a few years ago, I went out at break time and one of the kids came bounding up to me and says, "Oh, we like it when the inspectors come, sir." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Teachers are nice to us." Now, it's an extreme example, but what I'm trying to get across is don't put on a show just for this week. Again, a couple of weeks ago, I had an inspection, and every time we walked through the dining hall, the head was on duty. Every time we went out to playtime, deputy head was out there high-fiving kids across the playground. Even their colleagues were raising their eyebrows at this. It clearly wasn't normal. So set your stall out, work out what is normal for you at the start of a year, stick to it for a whole year so nothing changes when the inspectors come. We're also going to be looking at what the school does well. Again, this will be confirmed on Monday. But there's going to be an acknowledgement of significant strengths. And my opinion is that this is going to be not just about pupil outcomes, but other areas that could be celebrated too. I sense a move away from regulations being simply met or not met. And if you have, for example, a particularly special aspect of your anti-bullying culture, it might be that that gets flagged as a strength for your school. The other one to let you know about as well is that the original proposal for exceptional practice, a new grade at the top there, which was causing all sorts of consternation, is not being taken to the final framework. That's been dropped. So exceptional practice is dropped, but your significant strengths will be celebrated and they will be contextual. Again, we understand the differences between what a very, very small prep school can achieve versus a very, very large secondary school in terms of resources, manpower, facilities, and so on. So it will be contextual. Another one is this notion of proportionality, materiality. There's going to be a little more wriggle room for the RI's professional judgment when it comes to non-compliance. Again, a real-life example, I did one school SCR, and in the SCR, the lady who was doing it had done a super job, but she'd actually put in the DBS dates column for the new head teacher, the head teacher's date of birth instead of the DBS date of birth. Technically, that's a breach. Technically, that's not an accurate SCR, but it was obvious no children were in danger. The school was able to amend it straight away, and therefore we could overlook it. It wasn't a problem. So I can't give you any exact examples of that yet. We're waiting further guidance on what will be allowed and what won't be, but that's the spirit of what's intended there. It's already been the case to some extent with small health and safety issues, such as a potential trip hazard like a curling carpet that your maintenance team have come and glued down within 10 minutes of the health and safety walk, or an extra lock that's appeared on a door magically after we've done that health and safety tour. That's gone on for years, and that will still go on behind the background, as long as we can rationalise it and understand the impact of it. And for those that are pushing things a little bit, they may still appear on the report, even if it then says, and this was sorted at the time. So that's an interesting area as well. It's not simply black and white on those regulations. There is some wriggle room. It's a common sense approach, I think. Then there's the education aspect. This is not yet finalised. That's to be launched on Monday. A lot of people were worried that on the original proposals, it didn't seem to get a very high profile. The Chief Inspector has declared that educational success is integral to pupil well-being. Therefore, it will have due prominence on the programme that will be released on Monday. Another one that came up in the consultation was pupil voice, and some schools were really quite worried about this. And again, the Chief Inspector, I think, will say on Monday that they need not worry. Pupil voice is a tool in our triangulation. And does your policy say this? Do your staff tell us this? And do your pupils tell us the same things? It's not going to be overweighted. Pupil thoughts do matter, clearly, but any outliers in questionnaires are unlikely to hold the school to ransom. They're also going to help with that by redesigning the pupil questionnaire, I understand, to make it rather less ambiguous. We've had examples as RIs of some pupils appearing to answer different questions to the ones we thought were supposed to be answered. A classic one being, would you go to an adult in school with a worry? Pupils have answered that no to that, which is quite worrying, isn't it? Until you talk to them and they say, no, I'd go to my parents, which is absolutely fine. So we're hoping that through the common sense approach, triangulating with the pupils to understand what they mean, redesigning the questionnaires, this will be a sensible pillar in the system. So let's move on then to have a look at the actual new system, new sections that are going to be reported upon and inspected upon. You remember those 5 bullets at the start? Well, here they come. Section 1 is all about leadership and management. It will test and explain about the skills, knowledge and understanding of you as leaders. That includes governors, who have a great many responsibilities on their shoulders. I can't remember the exact number now, but I did a word search in the new version of Keeping Children Safe on governors should or governors must. I think there's something like 37 different requirements. They need to know what their job is. Please help them understand. A particular aspect will be the management of risk. And again, this is not just talking about risks for hazardous substances or getting the children off the minibus the right way. It's also emotional risks. Remember, this inspection framework is about pupil well-being. So, for example, if you have a young student who is suffering exam nerves, threatening self-harm, you might well be expected to know their issues and write a risk assessment to help colleagues support their needs appropriately. This covers all the original regulations that went into leadership and management, into risk assessment, into safeguarding. It also covers provision of information, what you're giving out to your parents, and complaints, what you're taking back from your parents in some cases. And of course, I won't say this more than once, but the whole framework still includes the original EYFS regulations and the new NMS if you've got borders as well. And those will be woven in to these various areas too. Second new section is all about education. It's going to include the regulations which you currently know as curriculum and teaching and assessment, and it's likely to include much of what we knew as A1 to 8 in the achievement section of the current framework as well. It will include co-curricular activities, and it will also, there's going to be a new focus, I believe, on supporting pupils with SEND appropriately. So in your curriculum, in your teaching, in meeting those regulations, make sure you've got that aspect covered as clearly as you can. Number 3 is about pupils' physical and mental health and emotional well-being. So on the mental health and emotional well-being side, we'll be looking at the role of PSHE and RSE in there, particularly relating to consent and how they stay safe in that area. It will pick up what has been part 5, SMSC, enabling pupils to develop their self-knowledge, self-esteem and self-confidence, and how well you as a school do that. They're the things that lift pupils up. The things that potentially knock them down again, it will look at their how you deal with bullying and school behaviour in the same way as we do now. It will also look at their physical well-being in terms of how you provide for health and safety, fire, your first aid, do you register them appropriately, accessibility needs, and all the water, outdoor play area, lighting, premises and accommodation stuff that you're doing right now. The fourth one is the social and economic education. This is, if you like, your pupils' relationship with the outside world and society. It will cover particular aspects of curriculum. It'll cover the S and the E of PSHE. It will cover the societal parts of SMSC. It'll also cover the ground that was in personal development in the current framework, and that's the one that says contribute positively to the lives of others within the community. A personal opinion, PSHE offers threads that run through this whole inspection framework. If you don't already do so, my advice would be very strongly to treat this as a core subject and make sure that it gets an appropriate amount of time on the timetable and that you're sure pupils are making progress in it. The DFE, as you'll be aware, are looking at RSE again. They want to prove that pupils are taking the lessons on board. The way you show that, even though you might not like it, is some form of assessment. And that's something you might want to be thinking about going forward. This section 4, then specifically, which regulations are we looking at? Well, 2.2e, the current guidance is for all pupils, year 7, year 8 and above, we need some careers guidance. Seeing that in high schools, not so much seeing it in prep schools so reliably where you've got 13 and 12-year-olds. Please make sure that's there. That, again, is something the government are thinking about at the moment. Also, under curriculum, we've got this effective preparation for the opportunities, responsibilities, and experiences of life in British society. That's an absolute catch-all. But what is it your PSHE programme, what is it your assembly programme does? How are you preparing your pupils to be the best citizens they can be in a rapidly changing British society? We'll be looking for evidence on that. And then the whole SMSC bit about right and wrong responsibilities, tolerance and harmony, and a recurring theme, encourage respect for others, particularly looking at protected characteristics. And again, piece of advice for you, if you don't teach protected characteristics as specific terminology in your PSHE or elsewhere, my recommendation is that you do so. You can't expect pupils to understand the importance of protected characteristics if they don't know what they are. So please, again, think about that. The final section, the 5th section, is, as it is now, safeguarding. So that's your paragraph 7 as is, or paragraph 8 if you've got borders. It also includes the whole staff recruitment, safe recruitment, SCR thing as well. And that remains still one of the highest areas of failure in the current framework. You've got a second chance going forward. If you haven't been inspected for a little while, take time to audit and make sure that you know those regulations and that you are following them. There'll be a report after the inspection, as you'd expect, and reports will look at whether you do meet all the standards, and it will also look at which ones you're meeting particularly well. So again, I'm sensing, which to be confirmed on Monday, that this notion of met or not met when it comes to the regulations will be moved away from, and we'll be able to actually evaluate things like the quality of prevention of bullying or the quality of safeguarding. Potentially, that's an opinion. Please don't quote me until after Monday. But if we're looking at notable strengths or causes for concern, that would seem a logical conclusion. And as there have been so far, there'll be recommendations and next steps. Even for the best of schools, there's a next step. Your report will be put into those categories there, which you'll recognise as those 5 pillars of well-being, starting with a summary and going through all the different areas. I also mentioned that we're going to talk about associate inspectors. Now, for years, aspiring leaders have tried to apply for training as team inspectors. That's open right now. If you've got somebody in your staff that would like to be an inspector, apply now. You probably find if you've already got an inspector on your team that the ISI will give preference to those schools where there is no inspector on the team, but that's not the end of the world, because there might be the chance to nominate one of your colleagues to actually go and be with an inspection for a few days. Obviously, you'll need to give them time out. They will not take part in the inspection. They will not be an inspector, but they will simply shadow the process. They will understand how judgments are formed. They will shadow people doing lesson observations, learning walks, whatever it might be. They'll sit in on team meetings to understand the rationale and the type of discussion. It should sharpen their knowledge of regulations and the sort of whole notion of how the process works. So again, that's something they're looking to put into place. They have said, however, they want the new process to have a year to bed down before that goes ahead. So potentially from September 24, that might be something to look forward to. Themes for the coming year. ISI don't just pluck themes out of thin air. They are handed down from the Department of Education. And looking at their newsletters and the activity there in recent months, I think these are likely candidates for particular focus in the coming year. Clearly, whatever Keeping Children Safe 23 throws at us, there is going to be a focus on special educational needs. There's a DFE green paper. It might even be a white paper now. That's out there. Prevent. Look at the Shawcross report, February 2023. That was done in 2015 as a big mover and shaker. It tends to have fallen off the radar a little bit. It's going to make a comeback this year, I'm sure. RSE, we know that the Prime Minister's looking at this as well, and showing an interest in this. That's going to be a hot topic. And I also think careers as well, for those of you who have Key Stage 3 and above. So next steps. ISI are going to publish the framework on Monday. You may well have had a letter from the Chief Inspector inviting you to a series of webinars to take place through the summer term. I believe the first one's actually on Tuesday. They will take place throughout the term, and so you'll have access to the handbooks and so on from Monday, I believe, as well. We're also going to try and give you some support too. ISP are going to put on a couple of road shows, various parts of the country, where rather than sit as you are now, as lots and lots of people on Zoom, as often silent observers, we're going to try and make it smaller, more meaningful groups, classroom-sized groups, where you can bring your own documentation for us to talk about. You can ask your own questions related to your own school. So watch out for those. We'll be advertising those soon. I'm hoping to get one in this term and then a couple in the autumn term as well. So if you want more information or to discuss anything further at any stage, there's some contact details for me. In the meantime, I think we've got time for a few questions, Dave, if that's all right with you. I'll drop my screen out and then we'll see what's what.
Yeah. We've had a question already, Rob, on the meeting chat. If anybody else would like to ask any questions on the chat as well, please feel free to do so. But Jeffrey Stanford has asked Rob, with book scrutiny, much of our work is moving online using OneNote. How would this be managed effectively?
Good question, Jeff. Yeah, and that's a more and more common scenario. Many schools are going digital more and more of the time. Some schools are working entirely on one-to-one devices. The way I've got around that in the past, and it's certainly one of the ways that ISI have talked about in the groups of RIs I have discussed with, is this is a really good, rather than just give us a password and let us go browse, because we don't actually know what we're looking at. This is one of those great opportunities where instead of sending 3 pupils worth of work for work scrutiny, send me 3 pupils with their laptops, and I can ask them open questions. Show me an example of how do you tackle whatever, and they can find the appropriate piece of work on their device to try and illustrate the point. And we found that's worked pretty well as well. It's something we are getting our heads around because it is becoming more and more common.
Brilliant. Heather's asked, Rob, thank you for that, Rob. Heather's asked, can you advise on how an application can be made to shadow an inspection?
Not yet. No, as I say, they are going to look at this from September 24. They want to get the whole framework bedded down, get all the rough edges off it first, without having to deal with a whole new tranche of new colleagues as well. So my guess is that this time next year, they will start to publicise that and let you know how to do that. If you're talking about actually becoming a team inspector, there's an application form on the ISI website.
Brilliant. Okay, so are there any more questions? Would anyone like to unmute themselves and ask a question? Oh, well, there's a few coming through now, Rob.
I can see some of those. First of all, now, yeah. Devin, yep. Length of inspection. Don't know is the answer to the question on that one. Again, that will be publicised on Monday, I think. There's a lot to get through. As RIs, we feel we could do with a whole week to do you justice and get under your skin and find out everything there is to find out. You as schools don't want to spend 5 days worth of hotel bills and inspection fees on having us do that. So I think ISI are liaising with the associations on that to try and get a sensible balance. So I don't know. It sounds plausible. I think 3 days or thereabouts is manageable, but I can't answer on that one at the moment.
Okay, Kathy's asked, how much emphasis will there be on teaching and learning?
It's all about teaching and learning. That section 2, I think, will be the biggest one, and that's all about the quality of learning and pupil outcomes. So whilst the pupil well-being is absolutely front and centre, as I said to you before, it's difficult to understand how you can have pupils who are feeling good about themselves if their outcomes are not the best they can be. So it will form a significant part. Again, we may have to wait till Monday to find the exact detail on that one, I'm afraid.
Okay. Ellen Moss has asked, Rob, that I've been asked to collate examples of exceptional work. Is there any guidance on what this might look like for EYFS to Year 6? It
depends on your school context, because if you're Ellen, I know Ellen's school, you've got a mixed catchment, and you've got a couple of kids with particular needs and barriers to their learning. You've also got some quite high flyers. There's another school down the road for you, which is very selective and would naturally appear to have more of those high flyers than you might. How do we compare chalk and cheese? It's very much for your school. If you have a child who has particular barriers to their learning, you might look at all the kids you know who are highly dyslexic or whatever, and from your experience over the years, I think you've got to say, actually, for someone who exhibits that kind of condition, this writing is really pretty good. If you get that sort of feeling, that's what they're looking for, I think. And there is no more scientific explanation than that, I don't think, at the moment. The way I would look at it, well, it's to do with progress. It's not the heights they've reached, it's the journey they've been on. And so if you had someone, for example, an EAL student who joined you in September with absolutely no English, reading age of, let's say, 4, and they're 7 years old now, and they've got a reading age of 6 by this time of the year, they're still below age, aren't they? They're still below expectation, but they've made 2 years progress in 2 terms. You know, that would be something to celebrate, I would think. Does that answer the question?
Brilliant. Okay, and D. Peel has asked, the current principle of pupil outcomes first, then contributory factors, is that retained, Robert?
My understanding is that will be retained, though I think we were sometimes guilty of looking at outcomes and not always understanding why things are the way they are. And I think we as RIs are going to be guided on how we can integrate those more effectively. So yes, I think that is a really important part. We need to understand your parents, the audience of your reports need to understand that the pupils are here because the school does this, and that's the really important factor. So I think that will still be strong. Forgive me, a lot of this is opinion. I know a little more than you do, but until Monday, I don't know everything either. We as RIs have been invited to a 2-day residential at the end of May, when we're going to be given everything and all the methodology that goes behind this. So maybe after May, I can give you a lot more detail and contextualize what you will hear on Monday. But some of it I'm guessing from other conversations I've had with senior leaders in ISI.
Brilliant. I think a bit of a question for me here, Rob, I think. So Rachel asked, how do we access these webinars in the future? How do we get notified of them? Well, the fact that you've found this webinar and you've been able to sign up for it means that we've now got your contact details. So when we tend to put 2 or 3 of these webinars on each term. And so we'll obviously notify, now we've got your details, we'll just notify you directly to your email address. And obviously the next thing that you'll be notified about is Tom Rogerson's event at Cottesmore, and then also the road show on the inspection that's going to be delivered by Rob. So that's the next thing to look out for from us.
Indeed, yeah. I'll take two last ones quickly, if that's all right. One from Amelie about formal lesson observations or just learning walks. Traditional lesson observations will be the mainstay of us understanding the way things are done. Learning walks are helpful so we can understand the context of your school and might form an hour's worth of activity on one of those days. The rest will be lesson observations, as I understand it, as we have traditionally done. And finally, Naomi, TIs, again, my understanding is that they are going to be preparing some video resources for TIs to help them get abreast of the new framework. I understand that TIs will be changing their role ever so slightly, rather than just being sent by inspectors to do X, Y, and Z. They will be actually leading one or two aspects of the inspection themselves going forward. So that's going to need some special training. So I think that will take place over the summer term. And I would suspect it's going to be video training, Zoom training, probably pre-recorded so you can look at it when suits you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Robert, for delivering this tonight. I'm sure I'm really grateful, and I'm sure everybody else is as well, that you've taken the time out to do that. I hope you've all enjoyed this evening's webinar. As I say, there will be invites to future events as they go live, and do look out for the recording from this evening, which, as I say, you're very welcome to share with colleagues at your school. So thanks again for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.